Scott Storch was a music producer who worked with icons like Fiancee, Long May She Reign, Justin Timberlake, 50 Cent, and Christina Aguilera. Scott Storch also blew, or rather inhaled, over $30 million in 6 months. Storch was the producer behind some of music's biggest hits between 1999 and 2006, and in the process developed a costly addiction that would suck up all his earnings. Storch made $100 million over his career, but that money went fast. The hit producer filed for bankruptcy several times, having spent most of his money pretending his nose was a vacuum cleaner. He also got in trouble with Suge Knight. Scott Storch grew up in Long Island, New York. His father was a court reporter and his mother a singer. Storch came from a musical family. His uncle Jeremy founded soul rock band The Vagrants. When his parents divorced, a 10-year-old Storch moved to Florida with his mother. His high school was tough, and in the middle of his first year, Storch moved with his father to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. They had family nearby, including Storch's cousin, who introduced him to the world of music. Storch was soon producing his beats and breaking into the music scene. By 1991, he was the keyboard player for the well-known hip-hop group The Roots and rose to stardom. He contributed to several Roots albums like Organics and Do You Want More? Despite his success with the band, Storch was sick of the band's packed tour schedule. He preferred being in the studio instead and decided to build a career in music production. As a producer, Storch worked with the top names in the industry. He'd already produced hits by The Roots before he worked with Dr. Dre on his hit Still Dre, where Storch played the piano that provided the catchy soul of the single. The hit skyrocketed Storch's career, which led to collaborations with 50 Cent, Chris Brown, Snoop Dogg. He saw himself as a chameleon and cared more about good music than the genre. Storch admitted he enjoyed the challenge of being pushed to work on styles that he hadn't done before. Storch produced hundreds of hit songs like Candy Shop by 50 Cent, Justin Timberlake's hit Cry Me a River, and Me, Myself, and I by Queen Beyonce. In 2005, Storch had produced over 80 tracks and was at the top of his game. He would sell each track for $100,000. Storch's biggest hit financially was the song Lean Back that he recorded with Fat Joe's Terror Squad. The song didn't just make him a massive amount of cash, but also proved his talent as a songwriter. In 2006, he won the ASCAP Songwriter of the Year award. With all of his success, it was time for Storch to create his record label, which he named Storch Music Company, and opened a music production company called Tough Jew Productions LLC. He was a top award-winning music producer, but his issues with nose beers was growing out of control, and soon his career, much like his septum, would begin to crumble. Storch's lifestyle completely changed when he became rich and famous. He amassed an elaborate car collection with 20 high-end luxury cars costing between $250,000 and $700,000 each. He would wake up, indulge in his powdery habit, and go to the car dealership. Storch had a Bentley, Ferrari, Maybach, Bugatti Veyron, Lamborghini, and a limited edition McLaren SLR. He bought at least 10 of his vehicles while under the influence. In 2005, he dated heiress and socialite Paris Hilton. Storch blamed her for introducing him to the party scene, which later absorbed his life. We know, you're like, Paris Hilton, the socialite? There's no way someone of her solid moral character would ever introduce a susceptible young man into that kind of party scene. We were just as shocked to hear it, but this is straight from the man himself. The couple worked on Hilton's debut album, Paris, together. They met in Miami and spent most of their time together in the studio, where they became very close. Life with Hilton was unlike anything Storch had experienced before. They were hounded by paparazzi, would take trips to exotic places, and partied hard. The pressure of working with such a high-profile celebrity backfired on the producer, and the pair broke up. Storch took a break from music, and his newly elevated social status meant everyone knew who he was. After his split with Hilton, he was linked to her assistant at the time, Kim Kardashian, someone who was way less game hungry. In 2006, Storch bought his $10.5 million mansion on Miami's exclusive Palm Island. It was a waterfront mansion with 9 bedrooms, an indoor pool, a movie theater, a fitness center, a spa, and a game room. In total, the property was a whopping 30,000 square feet. He parked his $20 million yacht, which had 4 bedrooms, in front of his extravagant house. Storch also loved expensive jewelry and owned watches costing $100,000, necklaces, and many more shiny displays of excessive wealth. He treated his girlfriends to millions of dollars of diamonds and wore a $7 million 32-carat canary yellow diamond ring on his left index finger. When he traveled, he preferred to take his private jet and would drop $250,000 each way to bring his entire entourage on vacation to the French Riviera. Storch dropped over $250,000 a month on partying alone. Well, not alone like he was alone, because that would be weird, but alone as in just on partying. For Scott Storch, party rock was in the house every night, and it cost $8,000. By 2006, Storch's net worth hit $70 million. He should have been financially set for life, but the allure of the party scene and his love for luxury goods would be his downfall. He completely stopped working, and partying turned into his full-time job. Storch's Miami mansion was the perfect place to enjoy the lavish side of life, and while he spent huge amounts of money on extravagant things, nothing compared to what he put towards his nose candy. Storch's reputation was crumbling. He became unreliable, and in 2007 actually made Janet Jackson wait 10 hours at the studio so that he could finish partying. The party stops for no one, not even the least creepy Jackson. Artists were no longer interested in working with a music producer who had stopped prioritizing his work. Word got around, and Storch found himself with more party time than he expected. By June 2008, Storch was behind on his child support payments and failed to attend the hearing. At the time, he also owed the government $500,000 in property taxes on his lavish home. With his legal troubles mounting, Storch checked himself into a rehab center. While he was trying to get his life back on track, the bank repossessed his Palm Island home and sold it to Rockstar energy drink founder Russell Weiner for $6.75 million, much less than Storch paid. While Storch's income might have slowed down, his spending did not. In 2009, he had blown through his $100 million fortune and had to declare bankruptcy. But the legal problems didn't stop. He leased a 2004 Bentley GT in February 2006, and the terms of the agreement stated he would return it in March 2008. Storch broke the lease term, and the Bentley's owners, the Atlas Leasing Company, claimed his actions cost them $65,000 in revenue. Police arrested Storch in Miami and charged him with grand theft auto, although they later dropped the charges. Aspiring singer Trina Ruberg paid Storch to produce her album. When the time came to start recording, Storch wasn't, let's just call it, awake enough to get the job done. Ruberg had agreed to pay Storch $45,000 to produce 6 songs for her and paid $30,000 of that money up front. She sued him when he wasn't able to deliver. Storch accused former Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight of bullying him into handing over songwriter royalties for a portion of their worth. Knight, currently serving his 28-year prison sentence, had collaborated with Music Royalty Consulting Inc. for the deal. Knight allegedly coerced Storch into signing over the royalties while under the influence of his favorite powdery substance, and made Storch fear for his safety due to Knight's intimidation and threats. According to legal papers, Knight forced Storch to participate in the transaction, where Storch received a fraction of his music's worth. Knight dragged Storch to his office to sign the contract despite Storch being unrepresented and under the influence. Additionally, Knight took the majority of the nominal payments Storch received. Knight most likely knew that the hit producer was down on his luck, battling his nose beer problems and financial hardships. At the time, Storch's most valuable assets were the rights to future royalty payments for songs he had previously produced. Storch sold the publisher's share of his royalty rights for $2.3 million to Reservoir Media Management. He wasn't ripped off in the original agreement, as the royalties were worth the same amount. Instead of receiving $2.3 million for his separate songwriter's royalties, he was screwed over. Storch and Knight lived in the same gated community, giving Knight a front row seat to Storch's struggles. He took the producer from his home to the officers of MRCI for a meeting. After Storch signed over his writer's royalties, they gave him a $5,000 check, which Knight claimed more than half of. Storch received another check for $58,000, but Knight threatened and intimidated him into surrendering over half of it to Knight again. In total, MRCI paid Storch $429,306.20, but Knight allegedly bullied him out of over half of his earnings. Storch filed a lawsuit against MRCI, asking they return the writer's share of his royalties. Sounds like he got off easier than Vanilla Ice, who Knight allegedly dangled over a balcony for similar reasons. Real estate moguls Brad and Seth Cohen learned of Storch's downfall and wanted to help him get back on his feet. The businessmen earned their money through real estate and insurance holdings and signed a $1 million deal with Storch using their own money to fund Storch's comeback. Brad and Seth hoped he would use his connections in the industry and prove himself once again as a hit music producer. As part of the deal, the brothers paid him a weekly salary, provided him with a rental house in Parkland, Florida, and gave him a Rolls-Royce Ghost. The terms of their agreement stated that if Storch failed a drug test or showed signs of falling back into his old party habits, they would take away the Rolls-Royce. The vehicle was under Scott Cohen's name, and when the Cohens discovered Storch was back to baking but only using flour, they wanted the car back. Scott feared it would be an insurance liability if Storch continued to drive it. The disagreement over the Rolls-Royce would lead the Cohens' relationship with Storch to dissolve. By June 2015, Storch filed for bankruptcy again, valuing his music company at $0, and in the filing stating he only earned $10,000 in 2014. The legal paper said he only had $3,600. Storch had $500 worth of clothing and a $3,000 watch. By that point, he only had $100 in cash. Storch worked on rebuilding his life and revamped his public image when he started Storch Labs, joining the Green Rush by entering the marijuana industry. He also started working in music again and was a part of hits by DJ Khaled, Rick Ross, Snoop Dogg, The Game, Chris Brown, French Montana, among others. The scene had changed dramatically since the height of his career. People stopped buying albums in the record store, and few owning physical CDs. Storch was contending with a much more saturated industry, where music was much more accessible but not always good quality. However, Storch knew he could still be a pioneer in creating hit-making material. Some of his best-known recent projects are DJ Khaled's Every Time We Come Around, Snoop Dogg's Happy Birthday Part 2, Rick Ross's Supreme and Sorry, and The Game's All Eyes. Storch has admitted to his struggles, particularly in 2014 and 2015, when he was in a different headspace. Storch claimed he was on solid ground after no longer flying the powder plane and was taking his music far more seriously now than he had a clear head. Celebrating his sobriety, Storch has worked on new projects with music's top artists and returned to doing what he loves, being in the studio and making music. Today, his net worth is $250,000, a fraction of his fortune during the early 2000s, but far more than it was at the time of his 2015 bankruptcy. We hope he lays off the nose jobs. What are some of the stupidest scams that people do? Let's get right into it and start with number 5, playing with fire. Adam McGill stands accused of ripping off taxpayers and laundering cash through an illegal scheme. However, further investigations have revealed that McGill didn't just rip off taxpayers, he also found a way to father a child with the ex-fiancée of a former client. And that former client happens to be behind bars awaiting trial for charges of trafficking and possession. There aren't many more complicated situations than the one Adam McGill has found himself in, but we'll try our best to explain everything clearly. The first thing you should know is that McGill has been charged as part of a 6-man crew following an 18-month Crime and Corruption Commission investigation into the dealings of a Brisbane law firm. The investigations revealed that McGill and his crew were responsible for aggravated fraud, fraudulent falsification of records, and aggravated money laundering. The investigations also revealed that McGill and his crew defrauded taxpayer-funded legal aid service of about $340,000 and then failed to deposit more than $700,000 into a separate trust account. And here's where the story gets dicey. A while back, McGill had an interesting client named Ivan Tessick. If there ever was a criminal name, it's Ivan Tessick. Tessick was held on trafficking charges and was the fiancée of Natalie Lucas, a South African model. McGill took a liking to Lucas, and they started dating while Ivan Tessick was already in custody. So it happened that McGill started dating the fiancée of his client shortly after the client went to prison. It sounds just as bad as it looks. But it gets even worse. Miss Lucas didn't just start dating McGill, she also moved in with him and lived with him for 2 years. But their fairy tale love didn't last forever. After Lucas decided that she was leaving McGill, she discovered that she was pregnant by him. She weighed the pros and cons and decided that she would have the baby despite leaving McGill. But what about when Ivan gets out of jail? Lucas's decision means that whenever Ivan Tessic gets out of jail, he'll be meeting an ex-fiancée that has a baby by his former lawyer. And to make things even better, McGill did all of this while he was separated from his wife. The married couple are now back together, though. It doesn't seem like McGill has a huge issue with this potential turn of events. McGill says that he hasn't spoken to Tessic since the time he represented Tessic. He also says he doesn't think the communication breakdown between both men is due to him dating his client's fiancée. We've seen this movie before, Adam. There's definitely going to be some kind of breakdown. Natalie Lucas, on the other hand, has another story to tell. She says that Tessic threatened McGill when she broke up with him just before he was remanded in jail. This means that Ivan Tessic may still have bad blood for McGill. Thankfully, Tessic remains in prison, lifting weights and being scary. Unfortunately for McGill, he may not remain in prison forever. Currently, Ivan Tessic is charged with illegal trafficking and possession crimes. If he's found guilty, he might spend long years in prison, but he might also get out of jail early. And if he does, who knows the sort of things that may be on his mind. It's probably not a fun movie night with his former attorney. Number 4. Sign your name on the scam. Catherine Paprocka, a former school administrator in Pennsylvania, embezzled about $600,000 from the school she worked at. Ms. Paprocka used the money from the theft to rent properties, go on family vacations, and even pay for in vitro fertilization medical treatments. Paprocka carried out her scheme by taking out loans and electronically signing them, falsely representing herself. The school carried out an audit of its account and found that Paprocka had illegally transferred money from school accounts to a crowdfunding platform and 3 other small business lenders. Paprocka's name was signed on every loan, where she was listed as the executive director and owner of the school, despite the fact that the school is a non-profit and doesn't actually have any ownership. Investigators also discovered that Paprocka had paid over $60,000 into her credit card. When she accounted for those expenses to the school, she misrepresented the figures and argued that she only took $12,000. But that wasn't all she did. Further investigation into her scam led to the discovery that she'd stolen several identities of senior figures at the school and forged multiple signatures to complete her theft. With the amount of money she was embezzling and spending, it was only a matter of time before she was caught. Paprocka has now been charged with multiple felonies, including, but not limited to, forgery, theft by deception, and deceptive or fraudulent business practices. Her bail was set at $99,000, and she's since been released from jail. However, Paprocka had to surrender her passport and was forbidden from leaving the state. Number 3. COVID cars. A California man named Mustafa Kadiri used payment protection relief funds released as part of COVID-19 funds to purchase luxury cars and lead a lavish lifestyle. In total, Kadiri got about $5 million in these payment protection funds, and he splurged over half of it on luxury cars and personal expenses. These payments were usually released to business owners who wanted to continue paying employees in spite of COVID, and Kadiri took advantage of them. He submitted paperwork proving that he owned 4 businesses in Newport Beach, California. However, there was one tiny snag. None of those businesses were operational, and all of them had gone defunct a while ago. But Kadiri's papers looked legit, and he got funds totaling about $5 million. Our accomplished businessman wasted absolutely no time spending the money he got from his fraudulent windfall. Kadiri had a taste for exotic cars, so he decided to purchase 3: a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, and a Bentley. He also went on vacations with the money for good measure. What's the point of being a big giant fraudster if you can't go on vacations and eat fancy dinners like all the other cooler fraudsters do? Kadiri was eventually caught by the police. Guess you really cannot buy 3 luxury vehicles on a government loan without attracting some sort of attention. Right now, the businessman has been sentenced to 4.5 years in jail. He was also ordered to pay about $2.8 million in restitution and a $20,000 fine. And remember, Mustafa, when you're taking out a loan, you're generally expected to pay the thing back. Well, at the time he was supposed to. Number 2. Single but married. Andrea Lawner defrauded the government of over £70,000 over 5 years, and her scam wasn't even complex. It was merely a single, very beneficial lie that sustained Andrea for 5 years and earned her thousands of pounds. Andrea Lawner registered with social services as a single mother of 2 kids, and she got benefits based on that fact. These benefits include extra working tax credit, income support, and housing allowance. However, Andrea Lawner suffered from the same ailment that many scammers suffer from. She just couldn't couldn't keep herself from ratting herself out. But Andrea didn't go and get a new shiny sports car like you'd find on the first page of a scammer's playbook. Instead, she did the next worst thing. She started posting pictures of her kissing her husband on Facebook. Under normal circumstances, this would be irrelevant, but this wasn't normal circumstances and is very relevant because Andrea told the social services that she did not have a husband, but she was posting him on Facebook. Investigators soon found her Facebook account and realized that the single mother of two wasn't really a single mother and had taken the government for a ride. The police went to work and seized documents that proved that Andrea had been living her best life with husband while collecting benefits acquired on the presumption that she lived alone. Lana was arrested for her crimes and was made to face multiple charges of benefit fraud. Andrea Lana had no choice but to plead guilty and wait for the court to pass its judgment. Luckily for her, the judge decided to be lenient. The judge argued that if Andrea were to be sent to prison, there would be no one to take care of her children. Andrea's last kid is disabled, and the judge considered the welfare of the child seriously as well. Apparently, the husband she's been living with is wholly incapable of taking care of their child. In the end, the judge sentenced her to a 12-month prison sentence, which would be suspended for 24 months. The court also ordered that she undertake 120 hours of unpaid work and pay £220 in costs and victim surcharge. Number 1. The Bentley. Daniela Rendon, a glamorous real estate broker, has now been accused of using COVID-19 relief funds to purchase a Bentley. The Rendon case is similar to pretty much every other case in that scammers seem to love using stolen funds to purchase luxury cars. Rendon's fraud wasn't all that complicated. She simply fabricated tax documents that falsified her company's revenue, payroll, and the number of employees she had. Once she got the fake documents ready, she submitted them to approved lenders in New Jersey and Idaho and let roughly $400,000 worth of sweet relief funds start rolling in. Miss Rendon isn't a clueless scammer either, so she knew that she couldn't just withdraw the money from her bank account and start spending it. If she did that, the police would easily trace it and find out that she was running a scam. So she did the smart thing. She got in contact with a payroll processor in New Jersey and started issuing payroll checks to herself, family members, and friends. This meant that even if the police took a cursory interest in her case, they would simply find out that she's been paying employees from the relief funds. It was a great plan, but there was one tiny slip-up. Good old Miss Rendon couldn't simply just keep her money to herself. She felt the need to treat herself, and that's what she did. She got herself a beautiful Bentley Bentayga, rented a posh Biscayne Bay apartment, and paid for some cosmetic work. She also used a part of the money to repair a damaged designer shoe she owned. Rendon couldn't keep her shiny toys to herself forever, and the authorities finally figured out what she was doing. She was soon arrested by the police and was promptly charged with 7 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. If convicted, Miss Rendon could treat herself up to 20 years in prison. What are some of the dumbest situations rappers get into? Let's get right into it and start with number 5. Stitches, the responsible rapper. Philip Katsabanis is a South Florida rapper better known as Stitches. He faced charges of drug and weapons possession after a confrontation in his Bay Harbor Island business. According to Stitches, 4 people broke into his business, a studio space with a bar attached, in August 2022. When they refused to leave, Stitches told his wife to hide in the back of the shop while he dealt with the situation. Stitches claimed to have seen 4 guys in his building, one carrying a rifle with a scope. He claims to have told the intruders to leave multiple times, but you know how it is with burglars, right? They never listen. So Stitches fired a couple warning shots, hoping it would help their listening skills, which it must have. When police arrived, the business was empty and there were no signs of a break-in. Body camera footage instead showed Stitches talking to the police about the 4 intruders in his building. He appeared slightly inebriated while he rambled about not having issues with anyone and mentioned he'd just bought a new house. He also told the cops he'd taken painkillers and some nose beers just before the break-in. The only evidence of illegal goings-on at Stitch's place that police found was powdered sugar that wasn't actually sugar. So Stitches himself got arrested. Although Bay Harbor Island police arrested Stitches for drug possession and discharging a firearm in public, they never turned in the stash of, let's call it, not powdered sugar to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's Controlled Substance Lab. No one knows what happened to it. Miami-Dade prosecutors were forced to drop the charges after 30 days passed without the substance being submitted for testing. Stitches had reported that one of the supposed intruders had a rifle, and after warning the 4 men multiple times to leave, he fired 2 shots. As the initial report stated, the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office also found that Stitches didn't discharge his weapon in public after all. He fired 2 rounds inside his own business to protect himself and his family, falling in line with Florida's stand your ground policy. Stitches, for his part, did say that he only used the amount of force necessary to protect his family and was cautious of his surroundings. The September 2022 incident wasn't Stitches' first time dealing with law enforcement. In January 2017, the then 21-year-old parked in a handicap spot in the most gangsta place he could, a Miami Whole Foods. Officers somehow recognized Stitches from previous arrests when they pulled him over and asked if he was armed. After confirming he wasn't, he tried to hand one of the officers a mind-altering cigarette as proof. They searched the car, finding a gun and ammunition under his seat. Stitches was confused, saying that he thought they wanted to know if he actually had a weapon on him rather than just having one in the car. We've all been there. During the search, cops also uncovered a mason jar filled with just under 40 grams and pills that weren't prescribed to him. Stitches was booked for having a concealed weapon and possession of, let's call it, some illegal things. If the rap game doesn't work out for him, Stitches is also a great clown name. Number 4. Scamming the IRS. Samira Merrill is a rapper from Detroit, and she went on the run after being charged with stealing over $5 million from the IRS and missing multiple court appearances. It always hurts to see the IRS get victimized. They go through a lot. Merrill worked with Noelle Brown, who performed with her as part of the female rap group Deuces Wild. Their name references poker, though, not number 2s. Oddly, their music is similar. Together, the Deuces participated in an elaborate tax scheme from 2013 to 2017 and claimed refunds and withholdings of over $13.6 million. In July 2021, they were charged with aggravated identity theft, conspiracy, and false claims. Shortly after they were charged, Merrill disappeared, missing meetings with her attorney and not attending pretrial services. Pretrial services called her a few days after they initially spoke, but couldn't reach her after that. It's always best to just ignore legal issues, right? Authorities visited the wig shop where Merrill claimed to work, but soon discovered that the business might have never existed. Neighboring businesses claimed the wig shop didn't even seem to be open. Although it was typically vacant, a nearby business owner claimed to see someone show up every few months. Pretrial services contacted Merrill's lawyer, who said her client planned on coming in, but again, Merrill never showed up. Less than a week later, Merrill's attorney was unable to reach her as well. Pretrial services went to her house, where they spoke to an unknown man who wouldn't provide information about her whereabouts, as unknown men are wont to do. The court revoked Merrill's bond and issued a new warrant for her arrest. The 2 women filed fraudulent tax returns for estate and trusts under business and filed returns for trusts under other people's identities without their consent. They involved others and made them pay the women money from the refunds they received. In total, they filed 122 returns, which the IRS linked together due to commonalities in the filings. Most had the same payer on 1099 forms, and some trust returns had the same return preparers as well. 106 of the returns were filed by paper and mailed to the IRS, with 69 coming from Michigan and 13 sent from Georgia. The returns filed electronically came from at least 4 IP addresses, and investigators later connected 2 of them to Merrill. Most of the refunds went to accounts opened by Merrill, including 2 checks for $60,000 for 2 businesses, Lucid Communications and Clean Sweep Properties. Merrill deposited a further $31,000 for a check made out to 4 Weaves Only Distributors Trust and another for Lucid Communications for $57,000. On top of that, Merrill put 20 trust tax refunds checks into accounts under her name for $1.3 million. Those wild Deuces filed returns under other people's names and requested $2.5 million in refunds under one victim's name. The IRS paid out $462,601, which was deposited into an account under the woman's name, despite her never opening it. They set up trusts and filed tax returns under another victim's name, using her ID to open accounts, rent apartments, and make big purchases that included watches and jewelry. They filed 8 falsified refunds under the victim's name. They also requested $1.6 million in refunds from 2016 to 2017 using the same victim's information, but they were never paid out. Noelle Brown told one of her childhood best friends that Merrill could help her apply for a business grant. The friend gave Brown her social security number and date of birth, always smart, which she then passed on to Merrill. The friend received a check for $51,000 from the IRS, and Brown made her pay $28,975 to Clean Sweep Properties, Merrill's business. However, when she realized someone had filed a a tax return under her name, she said she wasn't the one to sign it and that whoever did spelled her name wrong. She wouldn't have agreed to the plan if she'd known it involved filing a tax return and thought she was only applying for a grant. Brown referred many victims to Merrill, who also received millions of dollars from the scam. Authorities eventually tracked hide-and-seek champion Samira Merrill down in Memphis, Tennessee, and took her into custody. Her attorney no longer felt it was appropriate to represent her, as their relationship was broken down and couldn't be repaired. Ultimately, the IRS paid out $5.5 million to the women before uncovering their scheme. Merrill was facing a 10-year sentence prior to her failure to appear. Number 3. Megan and Tory. Grammy Award-winning hip-hop artist Megan Thee Stallion was shot by rapper Tory Lanez after an argument. The pair had a close friendship and would often drink and go to parties together. They also, at one point, had a romantic connection but weren't exclusive. Miss Thee Stallion sustained long-term nerve damage in her left foot following the assault and had to have surgery. As bad as it sounds, though, this is good, considering what normally happens to horses in these situations. She could have been Megan Thee Glue. Lanez tried to pay Megan $1 million to not tell the cops what happened. Following the incident, he kept apologizing and begged her to keep it quiet. Stallion invited Lanez to a pool party at Kylie Jenner's house alongside Kelsey Harris, her best friend and assistant at the time. Harris also had the world's biggest crush on Lanez. Stallion eventually decided it was time to giddy up on down to the homestead, but Lanez wanted to stay. Eventually, the trio got into an SUV with Stallion's bodyguard and drove away with Tory Lanez having a little tantrum. On the drive home, Lanez randomly confronted Megan and demanded that she come clean to Harris about their romantic relationship. As the discussion became heated, Megan got out of the car with the intent of walking home herself. But since she's one of the most famous rappers in the world, she decided that probably wasn't the best plan. Once they reached a quieter street, Megan got out of the car again and started to walk away. Lanez yelled something at her, and she turned around to see he had a gun in his hand, which he was pointing at her feet. A witness claimed to see two women pulling each other's hair and hitting one another. He believed one of the girls fired the first shot, but added that he saw Lanez firing bullets everywhere. Stallion denied ever seeing Harris holding a gun that night, probably because Megan was punching her. The case caused Stallion a lot of physical and emotional pain and immense public and industry backlash. While in the witness box during the trial, she said she wished he'd killed her, which is a bit dramatic. After the attack, the Stallion was handcuffed to a gurney as she traveled in an ambulance to the hospital. A female officer asked her questions while she was still bleeding from her injuries. The shooting overshadowed her career for a while, and many men in the industry took Lanez's side. Megan claimed that she was turned into the story's villain, and the focus was more on who she slept with rather than what happened to her. The defense suggested Megan didn't know who shot her as she walked away in an attempt to throw Harris under the bus. But Megan, being the proud stallion she is, stood her ground and clarified that she had turned around before Lanez opened fire. When police asked her what happened to her feet, Megan said she'd walked on broken glass, Die Hard style. She later said she fibbed because snitching about who just shot you was frowned upon in the hip-hop community, and she was worried about the possibility of police brutality against Lanez. She was worried about the guy who just shot her. It's that kind of attitude that probably got her invited to Kylie Jenner's pool party to begin with. If that was us, we would have added extra things to make sure police brutality was involved. Yeah, he just shot me. He also said he thought your uniform makes you look fat, but it probably wasn't the uniform's fault. Lanez pleaded not guilty to assault with a semi-automatic firearm and carrying a concealed firearm in a vehicle, but in December 2022, the jury found him guilty of all charges. He faces at least 20 years in prison. But that pool party at Kylie Jenner's house must have been amazing, though. She probably has the best pizza and the coolest party hats and party favors. And playing Marco Polo in that pool? Man. Number 2. Phony Swagman. Tunisian rapper Swagman is known for using social media to flaunt his extreme wealth. Well, until he was imprisoned for fraud and money laundering. Swagman, whose real name is Ateb Zabit, bragged about his lavish lifestyle on social media, sharing videos of himself doing smart things like burning money and showing off his expensive vehicles. But in July 2019, he was arrested for defrauding his fans. The scheme targeted fans whose ages ranged from 13 to 35. Many of them admired the rapper for his success, as he made it seem like his parents abandoned him at a young age, forcing him to live on the street. Swag offered fans the opportunity to get involved in lucrative investment opportunities and asked for their help with various humanitarian causes. He also asked them to pay his bail if he was arrested. Swag's victims, who were based in France, Tunisia, Algeria, and Canada, lost over $1.7 million in his schemes between 2019 and 2020. Tunisian authorities arrested Zabit after noticing suspicious money transfers in a Swiss bank account and defrauding his fans. A Tunis court sentenced sentenced him to 5 years in jail for fraud and money laundering, following accusations of extorting millions of dollars. Additionally, they fined him $36,000 and confiscated $6 million in Swiss francs and euros from his accounts, and he potentially faced 100 years in prison. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and his January 2022 appeal led to the judge dismissing the case. Swag also faced charges and accusations in France for his scams, but his arrest warrant was ultimately withdrawn as there wasn't sufficient evidence to indict him for fraud. Zabit quickly returned to social media and soon flaunted his wealth to all his followers again. He threatened to countersue anyone that accused him of fraud moving forward. The rapper originally lured his fans with his story about being orphaned and self-made until it became public that he wasn't an orphan and that his father lived in Tunisia. Zabit's victims trusted him with their money as his social media showed him living a luxurious lifestyle, and he had over 2 million followers on Facebook. One of his victims, Pierre, received a direct message from the rapper. An orphan himself, Pierre felt connected to Zabit when he claimed to be an orphan as well. Although he didn't know much about the rapper's music, he felt he could help him achieve his dream of buying back his grandmother's old house. He had $27,000 for the down payment, and Zabit offered to invest the money, claiming he'd be able to triple it in 3 weeks. With the understanding that Pierre would refund the money if there were any issues, Pierre met him in Paris and gave it to him in cash. However, something seemed off. The next day, Zabit was on a YouTube show where he pulled out an envelope of cash. Pierre recognized the purple elastic band around some of the bills and knew it was his money. The two communicated through social media, where Zabit convinced Pierre to pay an additional $10,000 to cover the taxes on the profits of his first payment. When the investigation into the matter was taking place, Pierre ran into Zabit at the police station, but his scammer claimed that they had never met before. It was not very swaggy of him. Unfortunately, Pierre was only one of many victims who shared similar stories. In 2018, an employee of Raiffeisen, the third largest Swiss bank, Stefano B., transferred $8.73 million out of multiple clients' accounts to a U.S. company and $5.7 million to a private account in Tunisia. The banker then fled to Panama to pick up his money in Bitcoin, a transaction he organized with an accomplice on the dark web. When one of his victims noticed the transfer, she alerted the bank, who blocked it. Stefano turned himself in to the Swiss consulate in Panama. The Tunisian account he sent some of the money to belonged to Zabit, and the U.S. account was Luxury Properties, a real estate company he managed with his girlfriend. Zabit denied ever doing business with Stefano B., despite his obvious involvement. In 2019, a Tunisian strategy consultant set up a website for Zabit's victims to bring their case to court in Tunisia, but in September 2021, he filed a complaint claiming the site was attempted blackmail. In March 2022, he filed another complaint against the prosecutor in Tunis for falsifying documents in a money laundering case. As it stands, Swag is free and currently touring. Number 1. Spot 'em, got 'em, cap 'em, charge 'em. Florida rapper Spot 'em, got 'em attempted to flee arrest on a jet ski, but Miami cops caught and arrested him. Spot 'em, got 'em, whose real name is Nehemiah Harden, was speeding on his jet ski and weaving around anchored boats when a Miami police officer spotted him going too fast in a restricted speed zone. When the officer attempted to conduct a traffic stop, got 'em sped away while swerving around boats and coming close to a swimming area. We're not sure where he thought he was going to go in his attempt to evade police on a jet ski, but the dude has to maintain his street cred. The rapper was already on bond for his role in a July 2021 assault in a parking garage. Harden was in the backseat of a Dodge Charger when he got into a confrontation with the parking attendant over an $80 parking fee. According to police reports, Gotham pointed a firearm with a laser at the attendant before fleeing the scene. U.S. Marshals issued an arrest warrant for him, prompting officers to enter his hotel room at the AC Hotel Miami Aventura while he was still lying in bed. He had a Romam Sugir Draco, a type of pistol that looks like an AK, at the side of his bed. In September 2021, Gotham was shot in his hip in his Dodge Charger as he drove down a Miami highway. A backseat passenger was also hit in both legs. Less than a year after the drive-by, Gotham tried to outrun police who spotted him while speeding on his jet ski. When they eventually got him, he was arrested and charged with reckless boat operation and fleeing law enforcement officers. Who are some of the people who hated their employers so much that they decided to scam them? Let's get right into it with number 6, Prison Baby. Jaspreet Mann, businesswoman turned con woman, scammed her company out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mann created 2 fake companies to siphon off funds while she worked as a corporate headhunter at Meggitt, an engineering corporation based in the UK. Her role wasn't literally hunting heads like you would enthusiastically hope. She was actually just responsible for recruiting talent for the company and was sometimes allowed to approach those candidates through outside agencies. Mann set up 2 recruitment companies and even made her unsuspecting mother a fellow director. Anytime she recruited someone directly, she would still submit bogus invoices on behalf of her fake companies to Megget. During an internal audit, Megget uncovered her scheme. They confronted her, and she immediately confessed to the scam and resigned. Acknowledging the crime wasn't enough for the vengeful Megget, who contacted the police. In Warwick Crown Court in Northern England, she pleaded guilty to fraud by abuse of a position of trust and acquiring criminal property. Judge Barry Berlin found her guilty and sentenced her to 2.5 years in prison. While waiting for her sentencing, Mann found out she was pregnant with her first child. Her lawyer asked for leniency from the judge to avoid her giving birth in prison. Mann's good character was pushed, and she was painted someone that lost their way. She was already embarrassed and was going to struggle to find new employment as it was. Further, it was highlighted that Mann didn't use the money to live an extravagant life and voluntarily repaid £272,000 of the £335,000 she stole. The judge, however, was a no-mercy type of judge. For him, the scam was premeditated, systematic, and lasted over 9 months. Mann didn't deserve leniency simply because she already paid back half of what she stole, admitted fault, and had a good reason to stay out of trouble. Clearly, she was a continued menace to society. Prisoners that give birth in the UK can stay with their babies until they're 18 months old. During that time, they're placed in a mother and baby unit. After the infant turns 18 months old, they're put in the care of social services who find a suitable home. Sometimes the child goes to a family member and others to a foster family. The judge's decision meant Mann's prison sentence would begin a few months before she gave birth, and since she would be there for longer than 18 months, social services would take the baby from her while she still had several months left in her sentence. Number 5. The Sick King. Neva Lawsey stole $780,000 from her boss, Sydney adult store owner Con Ange. Ange was receiving overseas treatment for a motor neuron disease and left the store in the hands of his employees, including Lawsey. Between 2015 and 2020, she made 380 transactions from business bank accounts into her personal accounts. Lawsey used the money to fund a lifestyle that included lavish vacations and an expensive wedding. She also rented a Harbor View apartment in Cindy's Point Piper suburb, one of the richest in the country. The 380 transactions came about as Lawsey claimed that Ange paid her in an unconventional way to avoid paying taxes. She claimed that all of the money was given to her legitimately as Ange only paid her in cash. Ange explained that Lawsey was only a part-time employee and he paid her $500 a week for administrative work like timesheets and organization of finances, including payroll. Lawsey, however, described herself as the chief financial officer of the Ange Group, a chain of Ange's adult entertainment stores across Australia, including New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria. Despite making business cards and touting the title to those around her, Ange claimed never gave her that position. In fact, her role and responsibilities never changed during her employment. Ange had to leave the country for his safety after someone firebombed his business office and he was assaulted. Around that same time, Ange also learned that he had a debilitating motor neuron disease that was terminal. Where Ange was being dealt a pretty bad hand, Lawsey saw an opportunity. With Ange absent, she could perform hundreds of bank transfers into her own account without him finding out. Further, Lawsey wasn't even doing the job she was hired to do. She didn't even file the company's tax returns. Ange believed this was because she didn't care about doing them since he would probably die soon anyway. During his court appearance, Ange explained that he was preoccupied after being diagnosed with a terminal degenerative motor neuron disease, having his business get firebombed, and being assaulted. Normal things that may distract you enough for you to not notice that an employee is stealing. At the time he left Lawsey in charge, she was highly regarded within the organization and had established trust with Ange and her co-workers. With his company in good hands, Ange felt he was free to worry about other things, like staying alive. Lawsey was notably anxious in court and asked not to be jailed as people relied on her for care, including young children. Ange, apparently running only on vengeance, feared he would not live to see Lawsey sentenced. At that point, he was finding it difficult to even breathe on his own and and required assistance for even simple tasks. Initially, Lozzie received a prison sentence of 4 years with a non-parole period of 3 years. The judge hoped the ruling would warn others against similar crimes. He believed that her motive was to fund a lifestyle that Lozzie wouldn't have been able to afford on her wages alone. Lozzie maintained her innocence and showed no remorse when she received her sentence. She filed an appeal against her conviction and sentence and applied for bail, which the judge denied as he didn't feel the appeal would be successful. However, authorities uncovered fresh evidence during the appeal process, which affected the outcome of Lozzie's convictions. Lozzie's individual charges hadn't been considered separately during the hearing at the insistence of the police prosecution and Lozzie's defense lawyer. She received multiple unfair convictions as a result and had some of her charges dismissed. The judge overturned half of her convictions and resentenced her to 19 months and 23 days imprisonment that would be served in the community as an intensive correction order. In Australia, an intensive correction order is a custodial sentence served in the community. Number 4. Choo Scam. Former Virgin Trains employee Shahid Anwar defrauded £116,300 from his employer in a compensation scam that he ran for over 3 years. When Anwar ran into hard times financially, he noticed some flaws in Virgin Trains' delay and repay that he could exploit. Virgin Trains' delay and repay policy refunded customers a portion of their ticket if their train was delayed. Between March 2016 and March 2019, Anwar scammed Virgin Trains £116,300 and had attempted to collect another £50,000. The refunds range from £9 to £746, and in some cases, Anwar transferred the money to family members, though it doesn't appear that they were aware the money was stolen. Anwar also claimed he wasn't using the money to fund a lavish lifestyle. Rather, he was at the supermarket buying food. But with that kind of money, he must have been shopping at Whole Foods. Anwar processed over 1,500 transactions and admitted that the racket became a stupid addiction, to the point that he was guessing which trains would be late while he was away from work to get refunds. He photoshopped tickets, then used multiple email addresses and roughly 100 different PayPal accounts to make the claims. During his time with Virgin Trains, Anwar was a highly respected employee that was well liked among his coworkers. Although he was the only one that got caught taking advantage of the holes in the delay and repay system, it was something that Virgin Train employees were all aware of and spoke about often. Anwar admitted to feeling relieved after his 2019 arrest. Submitting the false claims had become an addiction, and he felt he needed to be held accountable for his actions. Following his arrest, Anwar dealt with the public humiliation that this case received and had to tell his wife and parents what he'd done. With his reputation in shambles, he formally apologized in court and said he was glad it was over. However, his case took 3 years to process, with him being arrested in 2019 but not charged until October 2022. It doesn't sound like that's a big deal until you realize he was waiting for news of when his trial would start every day of that 3 years. Anwar's lawyer argued that since his arrest, he had worked to better himself, working in a citizens advice team where he was promoted and earned high praise from his peers. He also insinuated that Anwar had suffered a personal tragedy but wouldn't give details out of concern for embarrassing him and his wife. The judge spared him some prison time, partially due to the emotional toll of waiting for so long for his trial, which was in its own form punishment. Anwar was ordered to spend 20 days of rehabilitation activity and 200 hours of unpaid work. The amount that he'll be required to pay back will be decided at a later date. Number 3. Sick day scammers. 3 prison guards working at Rikers Island took part in a massive sick leave scheme and received hundreds of thousands of dollars from New York City taxpayers. The trio was comprised of Monica Coaxum, Eduardo Trinidad, and Stephen Cange. Coaxum and Trinidad were engaged. It's like old Pappy used to say, the couple that defrauds together is outlawed together. He was full of great relationship advice like that. Another one was, if she's gonna scam, then she'll steal you a ham. That man loved his hams. All 3 claimed sick leave for extended periods while still collecting their regular salaries. Stephen Cange was out of work from March 2021 to May 2022, but still received his full salary of roughly $160,000. He claimed he was suffering from vertigo and adverse side effects from the COVID-19 vaccine. During this time, Cange devoted himself to working on his graphic novel, Cure of Utopia, which was released in 2021. Around that time, law enforcement officers saw him perform daily activities without signs of being unwell well or uninjured. Trinidad reported multiple injuries between June 2021 and November 2022. Whenever he had appointments with city officials, he wore a sling or walked with a cane. Like Cage, he received his full salary, which was over $140,000. He might have gone out of his way to look injured in front of city officials, but pictures surfaced of Trinidad performing household repairs without any signs of physical distress. Coaxum also faked injuries and illnesses and was paid her entire $80,000 salary. Coaxum and Trinidad traveled together to the Dominican Republic, West Virginia, and Florida, all the while claiming to be too sick to work. Coaxum reported injuring her shoulder, wrist, elbow, and knee, while Trinidad claimed he'd hurt his knee, ankle, shoulder, wrist, fingers, hip, and elbow. The pair supposedly had several surgeries for their injuries and afterwards said they couldn't work due to trauma. Once the DOC caught wind of the scheme, the jig was up. Federal agents accessed their phone records and iCloud accounts, where they found Coaxum bragging about defrauding her lawyer. In a group chat, she spoke about staying home and still getting paid. Each guard's union contract states that a Department of Corrections officer has unlimited paid sick leave for illnesses and injuries that make them incapable of doing their job. Once employees have been on sick leave for more than 8 days in 1 year, they can only leave their homes between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. This somehow ensures the system isn't being taken advantage of. The pair submitted hundreds of fraudulent doctor's notes, and worst of all, repeatedly broke the 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. restriction. Authorities arrested the trio in late 2022. Their charges included federal government, fraud, and cheating an organization that receives federal funds. Rikers Island is a notorious prison that has become known for being dysfunctional. They have dealt with several inmate deaths and suicide attempts, which are often attributed to staffing shortages. The job wasn't great, but the pay was sick. Number 2, World Cup scammer. Fiona Barclay, a Manchester City hospitality executive, stole over $100,000 from the Premier League team when she transferred refunds into her bank account. Barclay was caught when accountants noticed an unusual transaction when a refund of £25,000 was issued, which was such a large whole number. When Barclay was questioned over it, she claimed it was an accident and apologized. Barclay confessed to depositing £15,000 of the money into her own account, then paid it back to the club. However, the club checked into the matter further and found that Barclay had actually been skimming money for a long time. In total, she stole more than £104,000. After an official investigation was launched, Barclay told police she'd used the cash to pay for some of her wedding and had bought gifts for her husband and family. During her hearing, Barclay admitted to fraud by abuse of power. She burst into tears in court and said she used the fraud to cope with her mental health issues. In light of this information, the judge required a psychiatric report on her mental well-being before they move ahead with sentencing. While being lenient, he emphasized that the evaluation didn't mean she wouldn't face jail time. However, the assessment would be a necessary tool in deciding any sort of custodial sentencing. The evidence that authorities uncovered with the assistance of Manchester City, combined with her guilty plea, made it clear that she was the person behind the scheme. She was premeditated and it lasted for several years. Another factor to consider in Barclay's sentencing was that she appeared to be in the early stages of pregnancy, meaning that she might give birth in prison depending on the length of any potential custodial sentencing. Number 1, the devil wears black and white. Former Vogue staffer Yvonne Bannigan stole over $53,000 from the magazine's creative director while working as her assistant. Bannigan became Grace Coddington's assistant in 2016 after briefly working at Vogue. She worked for Coddington for 2 years, and during that time, stole tens of thousands of dollars from her boss through charges to Coddington's credit card. During that time, Bannigan also sold Coddington's holdings to Real Reddit, an online consignment shop, where she made $9,000. Bannigan had her dream job, having gone from being an assistant at Vogue to working with one of the fashion scene's most influential figures. In 2016, as well as being hired by Coddington, Bannigan appeared alongside her in a teen Vogue spread. Having been thrown into a world of wealth and luxury, Bannigan could have never lived the same lifestyle as those around her on her assistant salary. Coddington was a mentor to Bannigan. She didn't give orders and preferred collaborating with her assistants, valuing their opinions. By all accounts, Coddington was great to work for. Coddington and Bannigan shared a connection, as Coddington immigrated to the U.S. from a rural town in Wales and Bannigan moved to New York from Ireland. However, 2 years after they started working together, Coddington filed a complaint against Bannigan. Through her lawyer, Bannigan expressed confusion over the charges. She was very close to Coddington and nursed her through several surgeries and a stroke. Coddington never mentioned misuse of her credit cards to her. In fact, Bannigan said she was the one that encouraged Coddington to report suspicious charges on her credit card to the police. Coddington didn't necessarily family seemed to be someone that frequently checked their credit card bills. She was very wealthy, and in the years leading up to the alleged theft, had signed a book deal rumored to be worth $1.2 million. Her home was featured in Architectural Digest and filled with expensive photography and artwork. She spent her money on frivolous things like a sidekick for a cat. Banned against charges were second and third degree grand larceny. Although she initially tried to label her crimes as a misunderstanding, she pleaded guilty to one count of fourth degree larceny. In May 2019, the Manhattan Supreme Court sentenced Brannigan to 3 years probation. She had already performed 15 days of community service under her plea deal. They say we only use 10% of our brains, but these guys are probably using at most 1%, just enough to keep their vital functions going. Let's get started with number 5. Face tattoo tells. Michael Ruiz robbed a Home Depot and then told police he had a firearm with him while he took items from the store. Smart! Ruiz and an accomplice got into the Home Depot at about 8 at night. They pretended to be shopping for something, and at some point during their visit, Ruiz's accomplice brings out a credit card to pay for what they had in their cart. But Ruiz had other ideas. He told his accomplice not to bother with paying because he was simply going to rob the store. Well, he actually said that he'd bust a cap on any employees who would try and stop him. Unfortunately for Ruiz, an employee heard him trying to be a tough guy. Ruiz then removed the weapon from the backpack and put it in his waistband. The same employee who overheard Ruiz talking about cap-busting employees could see him tuck the weapon into his waistband, so he phoned the police. Then our tough thief Ruiz took the merchandise that was in his cart and made his way out of the store. At the exit, he menaced an employee so he could continue feeling tough. His need to feel like Johnny Tough Guy elevated what was essentially an act of shoplifting to something closer to armed robbery. Ruiz was eventually arrested days later and quickly admitted guilt. He said that he'd gone into the Home Depot to shoplift, but instead of taking a real one, he took a BB gun. He also denied saying he would shoot anyone and refused to give up his accomplice. With the amount of trouble he's into, it makes you wonder what he regrets more, acting crazy in a Home Depot or all those tattoos right on the face. Number 4. Crypto dealers. Sam Karagiosis and Steen McBath created a cryptocurrency company that they claimed was going to go head-to-head with other cryptos and make everyone tons of money. Apparently, they planned to do this by using it as a front for their illegal substance business. Sam and Steen launched their crypto company, Ozcoin, which presumably stood for Australia Coin because these guys are oh so clever, and was billed as a rival to Bitcoin. They purchased Lamborghinis, drove other expensive cars, rubbed shoulders with sports stars, and even had an interview on the news program 60 Minutes due to their success. But all of this was done while an illegal trade was being conducted behind the scenes. The operation was simple. They purchased illegal things on the dark web, paid for them with Bitcoin, and shipped it all over Australia. The contraband trade made them rich, and the crypto business was just their way of cleaning the money. The police first got a whiff of the drug syndicate when they found suspicious substances at the Melbourne airport. It took them a couple months to track down the source of the packages to Steen McBath. At the time, the evidence wasn't strong enough for the police to go after Sam, since there wasn't clear enough evidence to link him to the operation. Lucky break, right? Most contraband peddlers with some brain activity would lay low, especially when that attention came from the police. But Sam was different. He decided to do exactly the opposite and began growing his social profile. The booming popularity of crypto raised Sam's notoriety, bringing him a low level of fame. Always a good idea when you're doing something illegal. In the interview, Sam claimed that he was self-made and tattooed the words on his knuckles, confirming how delusional he was. Most criminals would think that was enough attention for one man, but Sam was incredibly needy. Not only was he increasing his own public profile, but Sam also attempted to raise the profile of his crypto company by rolling out crypto ATMs all across Australia. This idea made him even more popular than ever. Sam became so popular that one time he was invited to sit in the player's box with Nick Kyrgios and his brother Christos at the the Australian Open. As all of this was happening, the police were establishing connections and leads that would eventually provide evidence to arrest Sam. 18 months after his partner was nabbed, Sam was taken into custody by the police. A few hours before he was taken into custody, the police confiscated various assets, including several bank accounts, a BMW bike, cash, and the cryptocurrency business itself. They also found that he owned a lot of properties, such as homes in the country. In court, the police will seek to prove that everything they confiscated, including the cryptocurrency business, were part of the proceeds from the contraband. Sam and Steen were both eventually charged. Steen faces 16 charges, and Sam has been charged with 14 offenses. All of the charges border on drug trafficking, importing, and dealing with the proceeds of crime. Number 3. You know nothing, Tristan Pan. Tristan Bishop Pan used fake companies with Game of Thrones themed names to scam the government out of millions of dollars meant for COVID relief. Tristan lied that he had companies named The Night's Watch, Khaleesi, and Nightwalkers amongst others, and used fake documentation from these companies to receive COVID relief funds. In total, Pan lied about having 14 businesses when in reality he had none. Our man was having a very good time scamming the government and was winning the game of scams, but his ruse wasn't going to last forever. For some reason, Pan thought he was the only fan of Game of Thrones, so the officers approving the loans and the security agents investigating fraud had also seen the show and were well aware of the references. So they got suspicious when they saw companies named after characters in the show asking for COVID relief. The officials subsequently flagged the companies and conducted further investigations. Their investigations revealed one thing. Tristan Bishop Pan had a lot in common with Jon Snow because he knew nothing. They found inconsistencies in the documents submitted and discovered that many of the websites and tax filings he submitted as evidence were phony as baloney. Pan had requested $6 million in payments for 14 different companies and had received $2 million for them before his plot was uncovered. But we have to give Tristan some credit. He did have some real companies, but he inflated the number of employees of those real companies, and so he could increase the payments he was supposed to get. Unfortunately for Pan, his lack of brain activity meant he couldn't disguise his fraud better. He was no Walder Frey. This led to his arrest, and after a year of court proceedings, where he finally pled guilty to wire fraud. He's lucky Joffrey wasn't the one conducting his trial. Number 2. Fake CEO. Eddie Alexander duped investors out of almost $60 million by promising guaranteed returns on their investments. But Eddie didn't use the invested funds to trade. He was just lying to his investors and used their money to fund a lavish lifestyle for himself. Color us surprised. Eddie claimed that he owned an investment platform called MNEFX. MNEFX was a Forex trading platform where Eddie took capital and turned it into profit for investors. He claimed that people could invest in this platform and earn about 5% return a week on investments. This meant that they could double their money in 5 months. Investors could log into MNEFX to check the value of their investments, and the site would duly report it to them. So, how good of a trader was Eddie to be there to promise such high returns? When he was selling his platform to investors, he claimed to have a robo-advisor assisted account to conduct trading. He argued that this was his trade secret and was the secret system that allowed him to make so much money on a rolling basis. Since it was a trade secret, Eddie was able to stop investors from inquiring about it. He also said that his team was supplemented by expert traders who wouldn't lose investors' money. But all of it was all a bunch of BS, of course. There was no robo-advisor assisted account, and there was no MNEFX. The site was fake, and the money investors were tracking were phantom figures generated by a computer. So where did all the money go if Eddie was never investing? Well, technically, he was investing the money. It was just more in himself. About 14 million of it went straight into Eddie's personal bank account. He used some of the money to purchase a BMW and used another part to finance car payments. He also used the money to throw parties, rent an office, and hire attorneys. But Eddie wasn't completely irresponsible. He did invest some of the money he got from investors, but he sustained a $6 million loss from those investments. Not only was he an airbrained criminal, but he was also a bad trader. Unfortunately for Eddie, he had always been on the FBI's radar. Initial investigations by the FBI showed that he was making up the numbers he gave his clients. They had videos of a whiteboard in his office that said he should never give less than 5% or more than 9.99% in weekly ROI to his clients. The problem with this was that his ROI was what was reflected on the accounts that his investors investors had on the Emini FX platform. So he was obviously making it up as he went. Eddie essentially ran a Ponzi scheme and built it up with even more lies. There were many times he misrepresented how much the company had to investors. Eddie even once claimed that the platform had $114 million in capital. At the time, the company had just $35 million. In the end, Eddie couldn't run from his lies. He was arrested and charged with one count of commodities fraud, which carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison, and one count of wire fraud, which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. Perhaps spending that long in prison will teach Eddie not to run a Ponzi scheme and lie to investors. Maybe at least try to cover your tracks next time, Eddie. Number 1. The Kiss. Dan Gabriel Agbusi flaunted his lavish lifestyle any way he could after laundering over 45,000 pounds. Unfortunately for him, he ended up flaunting his way to a prison cell. Dan Gabriel was someone you could call a retail money launderer. His entire operation was carried out using Facebook. He had a fake Facebook profile where he posted videos of cash and expensive watches and pictures of him smooching money, which is really gross the more you think about it. He also used this account to advertise compromised bank accounts that could be used as cash mules to move illegal money from one place to another. The compromised accounts were acquired and hacked into through phishing scams, and some of them were bought off the darknet. This account then attracted clients who wanted to launder money, and Dan Gabriel took these jobs and moved the cash where the client wanted. But it was through his Facebook account that he was arrested. An undercover police officer posed as a client and arranged several meetings with Dan Gabriel. After the officer collected enough evidence, he was arrested, and upon interrogation, he admitted his guilt. During his interrogation, the police accused Dan Gabriel of laundering 94,900 pounds as part of a 2,090,000 pounds belonging to a Highland salmon farm. Dan Gabriel denied this charge vehemently and said that the job was too big for him. He argued that he didn't have the bandwidth for moving such a high amount of money. The police didn't believe him anyway, and he was eventually charged with the crimes in court, where he repeated the same things. When asked whether he was lying, he replied that his grandfather was an elder in the church, and so he's not one to lie, which is sort of an odd thing to say after admitting to money laundering. In the court, Dan Gabriel also admitted that money laundering and crime was his life, and he has never had to work a single day ever. He was eventually cleared of the money laundering charges surrounding the salmon farm and 2 other charges, but that didn't mean he was innocent. Dan Gabriel eventually admitted to 5 separate counts of conspiracy to transfer criminal property. These crimes led to him laundering over 45,000 pounds. Aside from that, he was also implicated in drug dealing and was found guilty of possession with intent to supply. In the end, he was sentenced to jail for 5 years. After putting that money on your lips, you might want to get some Abreva to be prepared, Dan Gabriel. Happens when socialites start to get really bored. Let's find out and get started with number 5, the squatting socialite. Libby Mugrabi has been ordered by a judge to pay almost $2 million in unpaid rent for a luxury condo she lived in during the pandemic. The condo cost around $28,800 per month, and Libby stopped paying her rent for months before her lease expired. After that, her landlord alleged that she continued to live in the place for at least 5 months and sued her for double the rent of the overstayed period. However, Mugrabi claims to have moved out before her lease was up, saying that she had left the keys with the doorman. Obviously, pretty standard practice when moving out of an expensive luxury condo. Just don't do any of the paperwork or formally turn in the keys to management. You just hand them over to the door guy and hope he decides to do the extra work for you. Thinking about it now, it should have been his pleasure to do extra for someone like Libby, who probably even graced him with eye contact. Ultimately, the judge agreed with the landlord and ordered Mugrabi to pay $1.8 million to her landlord, a figure she thinks is insane. What makes this case even more interesting is Libby still sent out hardship applications, which meant that she wasn't only in debt on luxury purchases, she was also living on government welfare. Libby claimed that she had been behind on her payments because her ex-husband stopped paying her bills. This is interesting because she had previously won a huge divorce settlement from the same husband. Maybe now she'll have a better use for all the money she got from that settlement. Let's not be too hard on her. She did do the absolute minimum she could do when she was moving out, we can't expect more. Number 4. The Squatting Socialite 2. Melissa Berkelhammer has been accused of stealing from a luxury store. According to the police, she stole 2 purses, a dress, and a skirt from Bergdorf Goodman. Ordinarily, this should have been treated like a regular case of shoplifting because that's what it was. However, the suspect in this case isn't just a regular thief. She's Melissa Berkelhammer, the socialite who used to be the toast of New York City high society. Unfortunately for Berkelhammer, all of that status went away when she suffered a life-threatening car accident that broke both her legs. The medication that she was put on to manage her pain made her dizzy and loopy. As a result, Melissa was simply unable to continue living the socialite lifestyle and had to manage her health more closely. You could say she was now a social light, now with 50% less social. Shockingly, all the friends who used to invite her to parties simply forgot that she existed. You would never think that high society was that superficial. The financial hardship that Berkelhammer went through was so difficult that she began squatting at a friend's place. She told her friend, actress Julianne De Palma, that she needed a temporary place to stay. Julianne agreed because she believed Melissa and thought that the arrangement would be temporary. It wasn't. Instead of taking up as little space as she could, Melissa decided to move in with 50 bags and her mother. The ruckus they both caused was so great that Julianne was forced to lock herself in her bedroom while mother and daughter argued all day and night. They also messed up the home, making it impossible for Julianne to live there happily. After a long dispute over moving out, Julianne eventually got Melissa to pack her things and leave. It was after that period that Berkelhammer was caught stealing items from the luxury shop. In court, Melissa explained that the pain medication from her accident made her lightheaded and disoriented, and that was why she walked out with items from the store. Pain medications can be very disorienting, so it's not all that far-fetched. Berkelhammer also said that she'd been looking for her mother in the store and wanted to show her the merchandise. She claimed that she had merely stepped out of the store momentarily with the goods and had not planned to steal them. In the end, Melissa just received 10 days of community service. It appeared that the judge understood and didn't think she had been up to anything. But Melissa isn't done being a socialite just yet. 2 years after stealing the incident, she changed to a new woman. She got married, got a new apartment, and even got a job as a realtor in New York. It just goes to show that you can always get back up after falling down. Number 3. Accidental stealing? Socialite India Hicks has admitted to stealing a 680-pound coat from Heathrow Harrods. This news was particularly shocking because of Hicks's status in British society. She was the bridesmaid at Princess Charles and Princess Diana's wedding and is currently the 678th person in line to the British throne, which is like saying she's not in line, but she kind of is. So how does this aristocrat go from dining with royals to stealing a coat from Harrods? Her excuse was that she was just being absent-minded. Hicks explained that she had just walked into the Harrods at Heathrow and had simply forgotten to pay for the coat, which is the sort of thing that happens to most people. She's just so relatable, isn't she? Hicks told her story to a judge and he accepted her argument. She was also remorseful and the judge let her get off with a strict warning and a suspended 3-month sentence. But was she being truthful? Our dear India was born in London to Lady Pamela Mountbatten, a great-great-grandchild to Queen Victoria, and famed interior designer David Nightingale Hicks. After a while of living in London and jetting all over Europe, Hicks moved to the Bahamas with her long-term partner David Flintwood. She's given birth to 5 kids and leads a glamorous lifestyle. During the lockdown, Hicks shared fantastic photos of her life in the Bahamas, and these photos made it clear that she lived in serious luxury. But despite being very wealthy, Hicks has been labeled unusual because she still works for her income, unlike other aristocrats who just live off of the peasants. After Hicks graduated from college, she got into some modeling. After doing that for a few years, she married and went up to the Bahamas, where she started her own home restoration business. She also published several books during that period. Aside from her restoration business and books, Hicks also started a boutique shop in the Bahamas called the Sugar Mill Trading Company. At the same time, she worked with Crabtree and Evelyn as a spokeswoman and creative consultant for home and skincare products. She also became a public commentator on events surrounding the royal family due to her personal ties. Then, in 2015, she launched an e-commerce shop that she soon closed down. So it's clear that not only does Hicks work, she works pretty hard, especially for a British heiress. Interestingly, the entire Hicks family wasn't invited to the royal coronation of King Charles. This is especially important because Pamela Hicks, India Hicks's mom, was the bridesmaid to Queen Elizabeth at her wedding. However, this snub wasn't due to the Hicks in particular, but due to the smaller nature of the coronation ceremony. The king only wanted to have 1,000 guests as opposed to the 8,251 guests that Queen Elizabeth had at her ceremony. So the guest list had to be whittled down, down to the last 1,000 people, which is still a lot of people if you think about it. Unfortunately for the Hickses, they didn't make that list, despite India's 678th in line for the throne status. India said she understood the king's reasoning and even applauded it, despite the shoplifting embarrassment that may have played a part. Number 2. Princess Feud. Princess Rita Boncompagni Ludovisi was thrown out of her mansion after getting into a fight with her 3 stepsons. Her eviction from the home wasn't accident-free either, as she fell and broke a few ribs while rushing out. Princess Rita wasn't the only one to be evicted from the mansion. She also had to remove a Ukrainian refugee family that she decided to take in. The story behind Princess Rita's eviction is complex, but here's the long and short of it. Princess Rita's husband, Principe Don Niccolo Boncompagni Ludovisi, had passed away, leaving her in sole possession of the mansion. Her ownership would remain until she also passed away, at which point it would be returned to the family. But her stepsons have found a legal workaround to force her out of their father's house anyway. The sons claim that they own a portion of the building, so they have the right to throw Rita out whenever they feel like it. So it's a typical rich family entitled squabbling thing. But this mansion isn't just any mansion. The entire estate is the ancestral home of the Boncompagni Ludovisi clan. The Italian family is a very important one, as it has produced princes and even popes. In fact, everybody's favorite pope, Pope Gregory XIII, the creator of the Gregorian calendar, actually came from the family. And come on, who likes the other popes anyways? Yeah, Pope Julius II was an awesome war pope, but he's such a basic choice. Whoever likes him, their favorite dinosaur probably is a T-Rex too, right? Basic. Anyway, the mansion is a treasure trove of historical artifacts like rare paintings, correspondence between historical figures. There's a sculpture by Michelangelo in the gardens. There's also a Caravaggio fresco and works by Guercino on the walls. One can also find letters written by Marie Antoinette amongst the historical treasures of the households. Sadly, Princess Rita might not get to enjoy that anymore and may have to suffer through some hardship, as she claims that the eviction has left her homeless. The Italian court didn't just order her to leave the house, she was also asked to foot the legal bills of her stepsons. The question, of course, is why would her stepsons treat her this way? Is it simply because they don't accept her as a stepmother? Or could there be something else at foot? There is. This isn't just a regular rift between stepsons and stepmothers. It's also a rift between Italians and Americans. The stepsons see Rita as an American and believe that she's using her American privilege to cheat them. You know, all that privilege we Americans drink up and let run down our chins. But that claim is funny considering the fact that one of the stepsons, Bante, is wanted in the US. Bante fled America to hide from persecution and is now living his best life in Italy. Another one of the stepsons is a prison journeyman who has been jailed twice for credit card fraud and tax evasion. The issue here is that Rita had lived in the mansion for over 20 years, was actively working towards cataloging the over 150,000 historical documents found in the home. Her stepsons didn't like this and claimed that she was destroying the house, not safekeeping documents. They also claimed that Rita charged money for tours of the property and allowed it to get damaged. Rita, in return, argued that whatever damage had been done to the house was minimal. Unfortunately, she didn't have the time and energy to focus on defeating the stepsons through legal means, as she was focused on taking care of Ukrainian refugees she'd taken in. So she was easily blindsided when the stepsons eventually came to evict her with law enforcement. Today, Princess Rita's homeless and penniless, but is certainly not going to go out without a fight. She's currently mounting a legal defense to try to get the mansion back under her control. Whether or not that's possible will be up to the Italian courts. It all sounds just like a Disney movie, doesn't it? All we need are some Lin-Manuel Miranda songs, a couple talking animals, maybe some merchandise tie-ins, and we're set. Number 1. Stolen Pumpkin. Angela Gulbenkian used her name and social standing in the art community to steal over £1 million through a phony art deal. Matthew Ticola, co-founder of Art Incorporated, had paid funds into Angela's account and in return expected artwork by famous Japanese artist Yayoi Kusama. The artwork, called the Kusama Pumpkin, is worth somewhere over $1 million. Currently belongs to an unknown person. Ticola believed that since Angela Gulbenkian was a well-known socialite and belonged to the respected Gulbenkian family, she would be able to broker a deal. Unfortunately, he was wrong. While Angela did belong to the Gulbenkian family, that didn't mean she was a legitimate art dealer. In fact, Angela was only with the Gulbenkian family through her husband, Duarte Gulbenkian. Ticola probably believed that Angela was the real deal because of the weight that the Gulbenkian name carried in real life. The patriarch of the family family, Kalust Sarkis Gulbenkian, was a businessman, art collector, and philanthropist of Armenian origin, born in the Ottoman Empire. Throughout his life, he assembled a unique collection of art that made his name renowned in art circles. His descendants carried on that tradition, and that was what gave the Gulbenkian name its current status. When Angela married Duarte Gulbenkian, she took on the name and became a well-known socialite, which was why she was able to approach Tikula and trick him into sending her money to broker a deal she could not complete. At the time that Angela had brokered the deal, she and her husband were also experiencing trouble with the larger Gulbenkian family. Her husband had stopped working for her father-in-law, creating some rich people drama. The rift also led to her father-in-law selling the home she and Duarte lived in, leaving the formerly wealthy Angela in financial ruin. It was probably the situation that led Angela to spend the money Tikula paid her on maintaining her lavish lifestyle rather than actually procuring art. According to court documents, Angela spent over £200,000 on shopping, over $100,000 on travel, hired a private jet, and also bought luxury items worth thousands of pounds. While all of this was happening, Tikula was going through immense financial hardship as a result of the deal. In fact, he had to close down Art Incorporated as a result of the realized losses from the scam. Angela claims that she was always going to pay the money back. She even said that she had a pending deal that would have netted her the lion's share of over $2 million. Unfortunately, she was arrested before she could complete the deal. She was charged in court and was eventually found guilty and sentenced to 4 years in prison. What are some of the dumbest scams that scammers actually try to get away with? Let's find out and get right to it with number 6, Robinhood. James Parker found a glitch in a cryptocurrency website, and he used that glitch to exploit millions of pounds in Bitcoin. But he didn't carry out the scam alone. He had multiple accomplices who helped him steal the money. But here's the thing. Both James Parker and his accomplices oddly had no idea of what to do with a lot of money. So they spent the money on a lot of nonsense. They even started just giving the money away. One of them, William Boyce, took £1 million in a suitcase to buy a villa from Russians that he met in the back office of a real estate agent. He also paid corrupt officials off with £60,000 so that he could continue his money laundering. James Parker, the leader of the gang, had so much cash that he resorted to giving it out. He bought multiple £5,000 gift cards and started giving them out on the street. He also started tipping taxi drivers as high as £50. Finally, he bought cars for about 20 people, including random people he'd met in the bar. He was a Bitcoin Robin Hood. The only difference was that he wasn't very good at archery, and also probably didn't look great in tights. The scam itself was fairly simple. Parker stumbled upon a loophole in an Australian-based cryptocurrency exchange. This allowed him to withdraw other people's Bitcoin to his account and sell it for money. The loophole was so well hidden that Parker used it for 3 months and was able to withdraw a total of £15 million. After withdrawing the money, Parker got a band of merry men and women together. This gang helped him to launder the money and use it to purchase properties. Unfortunately for Parker, his luck wasn't going to hold forever. One of the members of his crew, Kelly Caton, reported to the police that her daughter had stolen her Bitcoin. At the time, it was worth about £75,000. The amount piqued the interest of the police, and they began to wonder how Caton got so much money. This launched an international investigation that culminated in the arrest of Parker. By the time the police arrested him, Parker gained a reputation as a generous Bitcoin millionaire. In the end, all the members of the gang were found guilty of fraud. Tragically, James Parker died before the trial could be concluded. The rest of the gang got appropriate sentences for the role they played in the scheme. Number 5. The 100 million sandwich. 3 men were accused of inflating the values of publicly traded companies to seek out merger partners for the companies. The first man is Peter Coker Sr., an elderly man who also happens to be the father of another member of the group, Peter Coker Jr. The third member of the group is James Patton. These 3 stooges hatched a plan to inflate the value of 2 publicly traded companies called Hometown International and E-Waste. Hometown International, at the time of the merger, only had a deli and $40,000 in sales revenue to its name. E-Waste, on the other hand, band had no discernible business to speak of. Despite the nature of both companies' income, they both ended up with a combined value of over $100 million. The Cokers carried out this scheme by making it appear that Hometown International had more shareholders than it did. Coker Jr. was the CEO of the company, and Coker Sr. was a large shareholder. Patton, on the other hand, was just someone who had business relationships with the Cokers. The Three Stooges kicked off their plan to inflate the company's value by giving shares to family members. They gave shares to associates and friends, including those overseas. Everyone was getting shares, and the company's value was rising like an inflatable balloon. The family did the same for e-waste, and they traded the shares back and forth among themselves to inflate their real price. The goal of the inflation was to get the companies to merge with other companies because of their stock market value. According to officials, these men were able to inflate the value of Hometown and e-waste by 939% and 19,900% respectively. Unfortunately for our stooges, escapades like that just don't go undiscovered. People were always going to figure out there was something unnatural about a business with just one deli being worth almost $100 million. By 2021, news reports discovered that a company with just one deli to its name was worth around $100 million. This was such a clear anomaly that David Einhorn, a hedge fund manager, joked that the pastrami at the deli must be heavenly. In any case, the reports alerted the police and the SEC to the scheme, and they immediately investigated the case. Their investigations revealed the shady dealings going on behind the scenes, and the police immediately moved to arrest the stooges. Patton and Coker Sr. were immediately detained. However, Coker Jr. was at large for a short while. According to reports, he was in Thailand and had no intentions of coming back voluntarily to take a bite of his justice sandwich. So the police did the next best thing. They alerted the Bangkok police, who found Coker Jr. He was arrested and then extradited to the U.S. The three men faced charges ranging from conspiracy to manipulating securities prices. If found guilty, the Three Stooges could face multiple 20-year maximum sentences. And worst of all, no more pastrami on rye. Number 4. Skating into a scam. Allison Mary Baver is a former Olympic speed skater who was accused of lying on loan applications to receive millions of dollars in COVID-19 funds. But Baver isn't just an Olympic-level speed skater. She also owns an entertainment company. The name of her company is Allison Baver Entertainment and promotes itself as a purpose-driven film and television company. Apparently, Baver submitted tons of loan applications in April 2020. The applications were for a $10 million relief fund for her entertainment company. In each request for funds, she claimed that her payroll was almost $5 million. In reality, it was nothing at all. Baver wasn't just the owner of a showbiz company. She also directed her own fictional reality where she told whatever lies she wanted. She claimed that her company was big enough to employ between 100 and 430 workers, but that was just fiction. Federal prosecutors discovered that not only was the company not big enough to employ even 100 people, but it didn't employ anyone at all. However, Baver still got over $10 million from her scam. To her credit, she didn't just spend all of the money on houses and a lavish lifestyle. Baver actually spent some of it on her business. She transferred about $150,000 of the $10 million to the production company behind No Man of God, starring actor Elijah Wood, about serial killer Ted Bundy. That represents about 1.5% of the actual loot she got from the government. Well, at least she spent part of it on real work, right? She also made an uncredited appearance in the movie, which is great value for $150,000 if you think of it. Unfortunately for Baver, she could speed skate but couldn't hide, and Johnny Law finally caught up with her. She's now facing 9 charges related to fraud and is yet to enter a plea concerning them. Be careful of the company you keep, Mr. Frodo. Number 3. The COVID House. Don Victor Cisternino is a failed lawyer and music executive from Florida who is accused of stealing over $7 million in COVID-19 relief funds. Cisternino stole the funds through phony claims that his company, Magnifico Incorporated, had a monthly payroll of over $2.8 million. He also claimed that the company carried 441 employees. The real number of Magnifico Incorporated employees was much less magnificent than the company's name might suggest. Instead of 441 employees, Cisternino had 0 employees. When our music executive got the funds, he did what any music executive would have done. He used it to upgrade his lifestyle. First off, he bought a 12,500 square foot, $3.5 million mansion on a 12-acre estate. The house was a work of art and had everything from a mobile theater to a 5-stable horse barn. After buying his mansion, Cisternino decided he needed lavish cars to go with the image. So he purchased a Mercedes Maybach S650S DX, a Lincoln Navigator, and paid off a loan for a Maserati. In total, he spent about $389,000 on buying luxury cars. Sister Nino thought he was going to live out his life very comfortably, but people talk. Sister Nino's lavish lifestyle soon got tongues wagging, and those tongues tipped off the police. But Sister Nino didn't wait around for the police to arrest him. Once he got word of the police investigation, he fled to Switzerland. Once in Switzerland, Sister Nino started traveling across Europe. He did this for 3 months before he got arrested in Croatia. At one point during his travels, Sister Nino tried to claim asylum in Ireland, but the Irish government didn't buy the corned beef he was hashing. An international warrant for his arrest was ultimately what caught the music executive. Once he landed on U.S. shores, Sister Nino realized that his song was over. He pled guilty to his crimes and waited for his sentencing. Before he was sentenced, the lawyers claimed that Sister Nino was not a fraud. Instead, he was pushed to make fraudulent decisions by his addiction to Adderall. They also claimed he was jealous of his more successful family members. Finally, Sister Nino's lawyers also said that the fact that their client had bought all his properties in his name proved that he wasn't trying to hide anything. If that were true, you might wonder why he decided to take a 3-month police evading trip to Europe then. And so did the judge. No weight was given to Sister Nino's nonsense excuses. He was eventually sentenced to 8.5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution of more than $7 million to the government as part of his punishment. Number 2. Social media never lies. Anthony Ragusa was arrested for claiming $200,000 in disability benefits mainly because he was not disabled. And how did the police find out that he was not disabled? Simple. He told on himself. Ragusa was making loads of money from the government. He claimed that he suffered a fall in 2013 while working as an electrician and that this fall meant he couldn't work. Ragusa claimed that the injuries he suffered were so severe that he couldn't even bend down to put on his shoes. His claim was successful, and Ragusa began collecting thousands of dollars in disability payments. He collected these payments while also owning and earning income from a limousine business in New Hyde Park on Long Island. Ragusa would have gotten away with his grift if he hadn't picked up 2 peculiar hobbies. The first was bodybuilding, and the second was appearing in social media videos. In 2017, Ragusa's wife, who was a trainer, began to post videos of Ragusa transforming into a bodybuilder. The videos were posted on Instagram and show Ragusa lifting weights at a Long Island gym known as the Mecca for bodybuilders. Interestingly, his wife even tagged Ragusa's limousine business account in the videos. This showed beyond a reasonable doubt that Ragusa had been defrauding the state. He was eventually caught by the police and made to face the law. In the end, he was charged with 1 felony count of grand larceny and 1 felony count of offering a false instrument for filing. Ragusa had no defense for his behavior, so he had to plead guilty and was sentenced to pay $200,000 in restitution to the Social Security Administration. If he fails to pay the restitution, he could be sentenced to 3 years in prison. However, we somehow don't think Ragusa would mind prison too much as long as it had weights for him to lift. Number 1. Don't bank with her. Selena Saab was accused of stealing the personal details of at least 85 people and leaking them to a friend. This was done in a bid to file COVID claims and defraud the state. The scam was a basic identity theft scheme. Saab was a civil servant working with the welfare arm of the Australian government when she stole the details of 85 Australians and sent them to one Salim Merheb through a messaging service. Merheb then used details to lodge a series of fraudulent applications for government relief. These fraudulent applications were then approved, and Merheb defrauded the government of about $150,000. Merheb used different strategies to get money from the government. First, he claimed Australian government disaster recovery payments. This paid out about $1,000 to every flood disaster victim. Then he claimed COVID disaster payments, which paid out about $200 to $750 per week. He next submitted claims for pandemic leave disaster payments, which paid about $750 to adults who could not work because of COVID. Unfortunately for Merheb, he was always going to get caught. The police eventually discovered the scam and his home was raided. However, even after his home was raided and evidence of his crimes was seized, he continued to offend. Saab was also arrested in relation to the crimes and was subsequently granted bail. Merheb was charged with possessing proceeds of crime and obtaining financial advantage through deception. Saab was charged with dealing in identification information and using it to commit fraud. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what's the craziest scam you've heard a friend you know falling for.